So in this video, I'm going to be talking about the Z Fold 3 versus the Z Fold 4, whether you should be upgrading from the Z Fold 3 to the Z Fold 4, or just plain helping you decide which one you should be getting right now. So without further ado, let's go ahead and talk about them. So starting off the hardware and the design, from afar, you're going to notice that both of them look pretty much exactly the same, but there are some small subtle differences to the point where you can start to nitpick and say this one has this and this one has that. So starting off with the glass that they're using, both of them have Gorilla Glass Victus, but the Z Fold 4 does have a Gorilla Glass Victus Plus, but glass is glass, so when glass breaks. I already actually did crack the Z Fold 3. I actually cracked it while doing some camera testing for this video, so a little bit disappointed there because I am trading it in, so now I have to get a reduced amount. But nonetheless, glass is glass and it breaks, so whether it be Victus or Victus Plus, it's gonna break eventually. As far as like the build of the phone, both of them have aluminum armor, I believe that's what it's called, so it's supposed to be pretty strong, but as you can see also, the Z Fold 3 has some scuffs here and there, and again, this was after like a couple of different falls. I rarely took the Z Fold 3 out, especially around concrete, but this just happened to fall on concrete, which is why it has a couple of scuffs and that glass broke in the corner. But besides that, pretty similar material that they use. But as far as like what they look like on the Z Fold 4, you do have a glossy finish on the edges as well as on the hinge, versus on the Z Fold 3 that's matte. So personally, I like the feeling of matte, or look I should say, but the feeling on the Z Fold 4 is a little bit better because they made the sides feel a little bit flatter compared to the Z Fold 3 that's a little bit more rounder. And that's actually, you could say the same thing about the rest of the phone itself. So on the back itself and on the front screen, it's a little bit more rounded. It's like the edges feel a little bit more rounded and curved. And on the Z Fold 4, it feels a little bit flatter, a little bit more squared off in a way, but it still feels pretty comfortable in the hand. So in the hand, honestly, I would say the Z Fold 4 feels the most comfortable over the Z Fold 3. Both very comfortable, but just a little bit more comfortable. Now, as far as like how it feels as far as weight, the Z Fold 4 is a little bit reduced in its weight, which is also nice. So in the hand, it also feels pretty comfortable. When you have them opened up, I would say they both feel relatively the same. So both of them are pretty comfortable in my opinion. Both two-handed if you're going to use it open. So just keep that in mind as well. And as far as the hinges, the Z Fold 3's hinge is a little bit thicker looking compared to the Z Fold 4's. The Z Fold 4 is just a tad bit thinner, and as far as like the feeling of the hinge, I want to say it's because the Z Fold 4 feels newer that it feels a bit better. But when you open it the whole way, I noticed that there's like almost like a snappy feeling. It's not an aggressive snap, but a bit of a snappy feeling when you open it the whole way that allows it to get flat pretty easily. Versus on the Z Fold 3, you have to put a little bit of pressure, because if you just open it up and try to get it flat, on the first try you likely won't get it flat. So you have to just make sure you flatten it out when you open it up. So I do like that hinge on the Z Fold 4. Again, it might be because it's newer, but the Z Fold 3 still has a pretty good hinge even after a year. The Z Fold 4 also is a bit shorter too compared to the Z Fold 3. Not a huge difference, but it makes a bit of a difference when you're using it open and also using it on the cover screen. You also have reduced bezels, which makes it feel a bit wider. I think they're about the same width, but it does feel a little bit wider on the Z Fold 4. And camera modules are also a bit different as well. So not only are you getting new camera sensors, but the module itself is pretty much the same design, but it does look a little bit bigger. So all the cases that you have for the Z Fold 3 unfortunately aren't going to work on the Z Fold 4, but I definitely still recommend getting a case if you can. I was using no case on the Z Fold 3 for the longest time, but after I dropped it, I was like, yeah, I'm kind of going to use a case now. And I definitely recommend the Samsung case that came with the pre-order. So if you can buy this one, I'm not sure exactly how much it costs, but I'll drop it here on the video. But I like this case. Even though the Kxnt can be a little bit flimsy sometimes, I still find it very useful and it's pretty comfortable in my opinion. So because the Z Fold 4 is a hair thinner, it does make cases feel not that much better. You're still getting a pretty thick phone when you have a case on the phone itself, but every little bit helps. Even the weight cutness, that because it weighs a little bit less, adding a case doesn't make it feel super heavy like it does on the Z Fold 3. So at the end of the day, I still recommend a case, or at minimum a skin, like a D-brand skin, to make it feel a little bit more comfortable and give it a little bit more grip, because they can be a little bit slippery as well. And both phones are IPX8, so that means that they're water resistant. So if you splash them with water by accident, no big deal, they should be fine. Both of them also have the volume rocker and the power button in the exact same spot, and I think a fingerprint sensor that's embedded into the power button is the exact same one. because they're both fast and reliable, and I didn't find much of a difference when using them. They're honestly exactly the same. You can use the fingerprint sensor as a gesture pad as well, so just use the pull down notification panel. It can be accidentally triggered though, so just keep that in mind. It might accidentally pull it down when you're in the middle of an app. And also you have facial recognition, so you have the option of either using it on the front cover or on the inner display. Both of them work pretty much exactly the same, so I didn't see much of a difference there either. Both pretty fast and pretty reliable, whether you're using the fingerprint sensor or facial recognition. As far as performance, the Z Fold 3 is going to have the Snapdragon 888 with 12 gigabytes of RAM versus the Z Fold 4 is going to have the Snapdragon 8 Plus Gen 1 with 12 gigabytes of RAM. So basically that means you're going to get a flagship chipset here, so all your basic stuff will be covered, whether it be just simply texting, browsing the internet, browsing social media, browsing shopping apps, whatever you're doing. If you're just doing one thing at a time, which I really don't think you should be doing on this phone, but if you're just doing simple stuff and simple tasks, this phone will be able to handle it no problem. You can also do more intense stuff such as playing games, multitasking, using your camera for videos, photos, and all that stuff. Sometimes it will lead to the phone getting a little bit warm, especially around the camera module here on both devices. I found that they get equally warm. If anything, the Z Fold 4 does feel a tad bit cooler, but not much of a huge difference in my opinion, especially if you're using them outside. If you're out in the heat, you're definitely going to get both phones to warm up, no doubt. So without a doubt, I still think both of these phones provide you with really good performance, whether it be simple stuff or more intense stuff like I mentioned, gaming and all that kind of stuff. But while both devices are good performing phones, it is going to differ just a tad bit whether you're using the front screen or the inner display. Both devices are going to give you technically a 6.2-inch 120Hz 1440p AMOLED display, so basically that means both of them are going to be sharp, vibrant, colorful, and smooth when you're scrolling around in the OS. Videos are going to look sharp and good and colorful. Here's a Samsung display, so you're going to be getting a good display here. But what is going to be a little bit different is ever so slightly the aspect ratio is, I would say, a little bit improved on the Z Fold 4. So you're going to be getting a little bit more of a wider display and a bit shorter display. Not by a lot, it's like a hair, I think a couple millimeters, which in my opinion, not a huge difference, but enough to feel the difference in my opinion. So where it makes the most difference and you notice it the most is when you're typing. So if you're either texting or just searching stuff wherever, it does feel a little bit more comfortable on the Z Fold 4. Not a ton, like I said, not a huge difference, but enough to make a little bit of a difference so that I feel a little bit more comfortable. Still a little too cramped for me, but any little bit helps in my opinion. But again, not a huge difference. And it also, you can notice it when you're like watching a video or browsing content. You'll notice that the Z Fold 4 does give you a little bit more content when you're watching stuff. Just the aspect ratio makes it feel a little bit bigger, but again, you're still getting a lot of stuff cut off on either device. So at the end of the day, you could make the argument that the Z Fold 4 is definitely a little bit improved as far as the front cover display, but it's not a huge difference, but still a little bit improved. And on the inner displays, both of them are going to be technically a 7.6-inch 120Hz 1440p Flex AMOLED displays. The Z Fold 4 is again a little bit shorter and does feel a little bit wider because of the smaller and reduced bezels that it has. But at the end of the day, both of them are still going to be Samsung displays, so they're going to be vibrant, sharp, colorful, smooth when you're scrolling around the OS thanks to that 120Hz, and the animations are pretty improved. So both of them are going to be pretty smooth in my opinion. But as far as like the crease and the under display camera, can you notice them on both of them? You can notice them about the same. If anything, you can notice the Z Fold 4's under display camera a little bit less because it has a little bit more pixels now. And as far as the crease, I personally think you can see them about the same. But as far as feeling it, I think you can feel the Z Fold 4's crease a little bit less compared to the Z Fold 3's crease. Both displays can also take an S Pen, so if you're an S Pen user, you can go ahead and use the S Pen on both of these devices. But keep in mind, again, you have to use a Z Fold 4 Special Edition S Pen, so don't go out using your tablet S Pens or your phones like your S20 series S Pens, because you will damage the display if you do that. But as far as the experience when you're using the inner display, very similar here. Again, the aspect ratio is going to be just a tad bit better on the Z Fold 4, but everything you can do on the Z Fold 4, you can pretty much do on the Z Fold 3. So one of the main things I love to do on the inner displays is multitask. So Samsung has a ton of features that allow you to really take multitasking to the next level in my opinion. So something new on the Z Fold 4 is the taskbar. So basically when you open up one of the apps, your bottom taskbar or bottom toolbar of all the apps that you have will turn into a little taskbar that allows you to drag and drop apps apps easily. And I also noticed that it gives you a little button to open up all your apps. So in this case, your app drawer, and it replicates your app drawer. So however you have your app drawer customized, it'll replicate it and pretty much show you the app drawer exactly how you have it set up, which is pretty neat. So again, you can use the drag and drop apps easily to start multitasking. But you also have the edge bar, which both devices have that available. I use the edge bar all the time on the Z Fold 3. That's how I actually multitask on the Z Fold 3. I still use the edge bar all the time on the Z Fold 4, even though I have the taskbar, just because I have some shortcuts saved on the edge bar that allows me to quickly get into my most commonly used multitasking apps. So in this case, usually Reddit and YouTube, or a couple of my banking apps. So when using both of them, I find the experience to be very, very nice on the Z Fold 4. Z Fold 3, still very nice as well, because that edge bar becomes very useful. But as far as like the limits, you can do only 3 apps on both devices. So one full app on one side, and then the other side will split up the 2 apps, or however you want to move it around. You can just pretty much just use 3 apps at the same time. Personally, I don't do that. I think it's a little bit too much for my liking. I personally just use 2 apps at the same time, or at most, I'll picture-in-picture YouTube and then use 2 apps at the same time. So that's the most I'll ever do when it comes to multitasking, but you have that ability if you want to. You can also drag and drop windows if you wanted to. Again, I don't do that myself, but you can drag and drop, I think, up to like 5 apps in total. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but again, I don't do that, but it's there if you want it. But do keep in mind that when you are multitasking, it does give you a little warning as well when you set it up that some apps may not function correctly when you're multitasking in a multi-window. It may cause some of the apps to crash or just not function properly because some of the apps aren't optimized by the developers to be put in these weird aspect ratios that you're forcing the app to go into. And another cool feature I noticed on the Z Fold 4, and I believe it's a new feature because I couldn't find it on the Z Fold 3, is that if you're in an app on full screen mode and you swipe with 2 fingers from the edges, you can actually start multitasking that way as well. So basically you swipe from the edge and then boom, it allows you to pick another app to start multitasking, which again, another neat way to just start multitasking very quickly. And you also have flex mode on both devices, which basically allows you to fold your phone and angle it in a way that it's its own kickstand, so that if you're watching, say, YouTube, you can show your video on the top half, and then on the bottom half, you'll have your description and your comments. Other streaming apps are also optimized, but if they're not optimized, just go into Labs, set it up to force that app to go into flex mode. But again, keep in mind that some apps may misfunction or it may not look as nice when you're using it in flex mode, but still you have the ability to do so. But I did find myself using the flex mode a lot less on the Z Fold 4. That's because I have a kickstand on my case, so it allows me to prop it up and use the whole screen to watch this video. But I don't zoom in because it does cut off quite a bit. So on both devices, if you were to watch a video on just the full screen, you're gonna cut off a lot if you zoom in or pinch to zoom, whatever it's called. So I just leave the black bars, so both of them will get black bars, and depending on the aspect ratio of the video, some videos will have bigger black bars, which is a little bit disappointing and not as immersive, but it's still bigger than a traditional size screen, and the fact that you have a big screen is pretty nice. Which is another good way to utilize the inner display, is just using one app at a time. Some apps may not look very pretty on the big display because it'll just be oversized versions of their mobile apps, but they still look very nice and it's pretty immersive in my opinion. And if you don't like the aspect ratio of it being full screen, or if it comes pre-installed with a 16:9 aspect ratio and you want to change it to full screen, just go into your settings under display and just change the aspect ratio there, whether it be on the Z Fold 4. On the Z Fold 3, you have to go into Labs, but that might change with future updates. But still, you can change the aspect ratio of the apps if you wanted to. And my favorite apps to use on the big inner display is games. I already mentioned the good performance, so games run really well, but just some games make you feel a little bit more immersed into the whole experience while playing. So personally, I really like playing games such as Rocket League, Geometry Dash. I started playing a little bit of Apex. I know nothing about Apex, but it just feels really nice playing on both of these devices. So it's like having like a mini DS. There even is emulators out there that make the phone look like a DS, but personally I haven't done that and don't plan to at the moment, but you have that option if you wanted to. But it does lead to my one complaint I have with this device when it comes to the outer and inner display. Just the fact you don't have a traditional screen size. So some apps definitely perform and look better on a traditional screen size phone. So for me, texting is still a big thing. Even though I said yes, it is a bit improved on the Z Fold 4, it's still way more comfortable when you're texting on a traditional size screen. And also this one might be a very small niche of group of people, but for me, I use Snapchat, and that is just not that great on the Z Fold series, because if you use the outer display to send a snap, you're going to be sending a narrow looking snap. If you use the full screen inner display, you'll be sending a squarish snap. But again, you can change the aspect ratio if you wanted to, so change it to 16:9 to make it look more normal. But I don't like the fact that I have to make it 16:9 and then have to open up my display to take a snap. But at the end of the day, it's still very nice to have a big display and outer display, but sometimes, like I said, you'll miss that traditional size screen. Nevertheless, besides like the foldable features, you also have your traditional Samsung features that are pretty much exactly the same on both devices. So Samsung Dex is available on both of these devices. Link to Windows is also available. You can also text and receive calls on other devices such as tablets if you connect them with your tablets. You have Samsung's Quick Share and then Google's Nearby Share. You also have the Smart Stack widget, which basically allows you to stack widgets on top of each other so you don't have to use up the whole display for all kinds of different widgets. You also have Secure Folder, and then you also have a ton of customization features, not only in the stock OS, but if you download Good Luck, you're going to have a lot of fun there if you want to customize your device as you please. And as far as software support, on the Z Fold 3, you will be getting 3 years of OS updates with 4 years of security updates versus the Z Fold 4. That's promised 4 years of OS updates and 5 years of security updates. So it is a bit longer support on the Z Fold 4, especially since the Z Fold 3 is a year old now. Really wish they would have promised 4 years on this as well, just because I definitely think the processor can handle it. But as far as durability, potentially should be able to handle it as well. I forgot to mention earlier on the inner display, but I do have the screen protectors peeling off a little bit on the inner display, and there also is a bit of discoloration on the inner crease. So if you look very closely, whether it be on the white background or a colored background, you can see a little bit of like a rainbowish looking color effect and distortion there. I'm not entirely sure why it's happening. It could be because the screen protector itself is cracking or the display is cracking. I hope not, but I'm not gonna find out. Like I said, I am trading it in, so I'm just trying to get rid of it before it cracks, and hopefully they don't see that and they're like, hey, this is cracking, and I'm screwed. But besides that, as far as durability, there is that question about durability, but as far as the OS updates, they're there and they're gonna support you for a long time. Now, as far as the cameras, I am not a heavy camera user, so in my opinion, I think both cameras are great, and if anything, the Z Fold 4 is just ever so slightly improved, but for the most part, most of the time, they look exactly the same when I take a photo. So as far as the front, photos are gonna look sharp and vibrant, and like I mentioned, a little bit improved in the Z Fold 4 because it did look a touch sharper and a little bit more detailed. Minimal difference, but enough to make a difference in my opinion. For video, both of them can record 4K 30 and 4K 60, but I just use 4K 30. And again, look very similar, and if anything, the Z Fold 4 does have a tad bit more sharpness, but very small difference that you can't really tell unless you're really looking for it. And you can use the back cameras to take a selfie and a video selfie as well. Again, similar to the front, the Z Fold 4 does look a tad bit sharper, albeit both of them are going to be vibrant, but the Z Fold 3 does look a little bit more vibrant in my opinion. As far as taking photos in the back, whether you're using the ultra wide, the wide, or the telephoto, you're going to get a pretty good shot on all three lenses on both devices. But the Z Fold 3 does have a little bit of an inconsistent ultra wide, so it doesn't look as similar to the rest of the lenses when you're taking photos, versus Z Fold 4 that says pretty consistent, whether it be the ultra wide, wide, or telephoto. I also noticed that the ultra wide does look a little bit less sharp compared to the Z Fold 4, but again, very minimal difference here. And as far as the wide, pretty much exactly the same. But again, if you're looking very closely, you could see that the Z Fold 4 does look a little bit sharper. The telephoto is definitely a bit improved, I think, here. So the telephoto on the Z Fold 4 can go up to 3x versus 2x on the Z Fold 3. But the Z Fold 4 can also go further to 30x and 20x. But in my opinion, I think once you hit 10x on the Z Fold 4, for some reason, everything looks very smooth compared to the Z Fold 3, that everything doesn't look like detailed and sharp and good, but it looks a little bit nicer in my opinion. It could just be my opinion, but it's up to you to decide that whether you like that or not. But overall, the Z Fold 3 does seem to be a bit brighter as well in some areas and photos, and adds a little bit of noise too. So even though it's a little bit brighter, it does look a little bit noisier in some of those areas. And the Z Fold 4, while it's not as bright in some of those areas, it does look sharp overall. As far as video, you can record up to 8K on the Z Fold 4, but personally I don't use that. I only record 4K, which does look very good on both devices, and at most times it looks exactly the same. There are times where the Z Fold 3 will look a little bit more vibrant compared to the Z Fold 4, or vice versa. So sometimes their colors look very different to each other, but regardless, like I said, look very good in my opinion on both of them. And same thing as photos, when you're zooming in, you do have the ability to go up to 12x on the Z Fold 4 and only 10x on the Z Fold 3. Not much of a difference as far as how far you can zoom, but again, I did notice that the Z Fold 4 looks smoother for some reason, and the Z Fold 3 just looks sharper with more detail. I prefer to look up the Z Fold 3 over the Z Fold 4, but again, it's your opinion to decide that. And also similar with the lighting, where the Z Fold 3 will try to get more light and look brighter, but will also look a bit noisier compared to the Z Fold 4 that may not be as bright. Again, it's very minimal difference here, but it looks a little bit sharper in my opinion. As far as the under display camera, I personally do not use it at all, so I think they pretty much look exactly the same. If anything, the Z Fold 4 is a tad bit improved as far as how it looks. It doesn't look as hazy to the Z Fold 3, but still, I'm not going to use it. But if you wanted to use it, you can use it and it's there. And because they're fold devices, you do have special fold features. So for example, you can use them in flex mode. So basically use your own phone as its own kickstand and record videos or take photos and stuff like that. You'll also have the ability to use a preview on the cover display. So if you're filming someone, taking a photo of someone, you can use the cover display to preview it so that they can line up and see themselves when you're taking a photo and stuff. You also have the ability, as I mentioned before, to take selfies and video selfies using the main camera lenses by using a special feature. As far as Snapchat, I know it's a small niche thing, but I do want to mention it, and I already complained about the aspect ratio, but as far as the quality of the photos and stuff like that, it is a bit improved technically on the Z Fold 4 because you have the ability to use the ultra wide and the telephoto lens. So if you zoom in further, you're going to be getting slightly better quality on the Z Fold 4. But I also did notice that in order to get decent quality on whichever phone you're using, whether it be the Z Fold 3 or Z Fold 4, you have to use the main home screen when you open up the app to take a photo. Otherwise, if you're replying to someone, it takes a dip in quality. It just looks a little bit weird, and to me, it's a little bit odd and annoying at the same time. But regardless, I wouldn't say that both these devices are really meant for social media people. So if social media is an important thing to you, so example Snapchat, the quality isn't going to be the best, so I definitely would recommend a traditional phone for that, so such as an iPhone or a Pixel or an S20 series or something like that, because the photo quality will probably be much better on those devices than it would be on the Z Fold 3 or the Z Fold 4. But overall, camera quality, whether it be Snapchat or your main lenses, very similar, but very slightly improved on the Z Fold 4. As far as battery life, both of them are going to have a 4,400 milliamp hour battery, which kind of sucks. I was hoping for an improvement on the Z Fold 4, but at least you get a new chipset, so I did notice a little bit of an improvement in battery life. So both devices can pretty much get me through my whole day. So on my late usage days, I'll get around 2 to 3 hours screen on time on either device, but on the Z Fold 3, I'll probably end with like less than 10% of battery life, versus Z Fold 4, I'll probably end with like less than 25%. So a slight improvement there. And as far as like on my heavy days, I'll get anywhere from 3 to 5 hours max of screen on time, and on the Z Fold 3, I'll probably end up killing it by like 5 o'clock at the earliest to about 7 at the latest. Versus on the Z Fold 4, the earliest is like around 6 or 7, with the latest being 9 o'clock. So a bit of an improvement there, but still not a huge difference in my opinion, but still slightly improved. As far as charging speeds, you do have the exact same speed, so 25 watts of charging, so it ends up taking about an hour and 20 minutes on both devices, which I was hoping for an improvement of at least like 45 watts on the Z Fold 4, so that's a little bit disappointing. But you do have the same other features such as wireless charging, reverse wireless charging, and you can protect the battery on both devices if you wanted to. So as you can see, the Z Fold 4 is just a refinement to the Z Fold 3, so as far as like should you upgrade from the Z Fold 3 to the Z Fold 4, depending on how much you're paying to upgrade, in my opinion, if you're spending like $500 or more, I would even say $300 or more, I would say no and save your money. There is small refinements that does make it a little bit better, but in my opinion, not worth like hundreds and hundreds of dollars to change to the Z Fold 4. Definitely think you should just save your money and wait till next year. But if you're a Z Fold 1 owner or a Z Fold 2 owner, definitely think you should upgrade now, or unless you still want to wait, then yeah, you can definitely wait, but this is still a very nice upgrade to the Z Fold 4. As far as choosing between these two, if the Z Fold 4 is like a lot more expensive, then definitely just get the Z Fold 3. You're going to be getting a really good device here and a good entryway to the foldable devices. But if it's like minimum upgrades or minimum difference of money, so like I'm saying like 100 to 300 hours more, definitely just go for the Z Fold 4 at that point. But otherwise, like I said, if it's a big difference as far as how much they cost, definitely just go for the Z Fold 3. But besides that, for me personally, I'm going to stick with the Z Fold 4 because I already went through the hassle of trading in, so I'm just going to stick with it. But if I didn't trade in, I definitely would have just stuck with my Z Fold 3. But otherwise, that's been it. Hope this helped. Hope you guys enjoyed. Peace.